Q&A panel and just an open discussion with some of the presenters. Some people can pop in, pop out as they need. We'll continue to take questions from the audience in the comments. Also, if you are watching, please like, share, subscribe. That way we can, get the word out. So I'd like to start off the discussion. Just something I noticed through watching is it seems as though there was a theme of dehumanization. And so in order to justify killing mass amounts of people, starting with Shree's presentation about children in the womb, right? So there's an attempt to dehumanize them. And then when you were talking about Hitler, they were dehumanizing the Jews. And then with slavery, you had things like phrenology, which I believe had Darwinian origins.
Yes, it did. Yep.
Yeah.
I did an article on that.
So all of these things, what they are is they're an attempt to dehumanize the person that you're trying to kill. But what does that suggest? It suggests that the moral law written on our hearts knows that the taking of a human life is wrong and that human life has value. Now, did you mention much on the phrenology? Because I know you said you studied a lot about it, but I don't know if you presented in the presentation much. What is phrenology to start off, and then explain its Darwinian origins?
Phrenology is measuring the bumps on a person's head, bumps and indentations. If he has a bump, that part of the brain is more developed, and therefore what that part of the brain does it better. If you have an indentation, a kind of a cavity, that part is less developed, and therefore you have less of whatever that part does. And so that's basically what phrenology does. And it was the earlier phrenologists based it on evolution. Not all did, but some did. And it was at the core because we evolved. Some evolved. The brain part was further evolved than others. Others didn't evolve the whole brain as much as they should, and therefore they're ancestors. So we're not talking about the individual person, but the evolutionary line. So in some ways, phrenology is very racist.
Yeah, it's rooted in race, and there was an attempt to dehumanize slaves. So by making them less than human, they're less highly evolved. So then it's okay. They even made something called a slave Bible, which I thought was interesting because they actually had to change the Bible. They had to take out sections, take out verses, take out entire chapters. I think even books. I think Exodus is like missing to justify slavery, and that was the only Bible that they would allow slaves to have, which I think also shows that the Bible does not support slavery.
Hey, we've actually got a question from Walt. What does a baby know intuitively at birth, and is the baby's mind a blank slate? Tabula rasa, I don't know if I pronounced it properly or not, or do they know something?
Well, that sounds like a better question for Shree. Did at birth or at conception?
Let me see. What does a baby know intuitively at birth?
Oh, I mean, I can answer some of this because through osmosis I learned from Shree. But yeah, so they know their mother's voice, they can feel pain, there's food that they like, they can recognize music and other sounds, all these things that they heard and experienced in the womb. They already have that. They are constantly absorbing new experiences. So even the act of being born, and now they're feeling the air, and they're eventually opening their eyes and seeing things. So that it's just this constant learning and new experiences, and they do absorb it very fast. But they are also absorbing a lot of information in the womb. Even if the mother is sick, they can kind of tell that too. So they do have experiences in the womb.
Awesome. Yeah. Belinda, the the psychologist in the chat. She said fetuses who listen to stories can identify the stories after they are born, and they also seem to prefer taste based on amniotic fluid flavors. So they're definitely not blank slates.
Yeah, well, it's a clump of cells, right? I'm a clump of cells. You're a clump of cells. That argument, I can't stand. But that's that dehumanization, like I was talking about. Now
Yeah.
we do have Sal Cordova who has joined us. Welcome, Sal. And I know you'll be presenting tomorrow, but I don't know how much of that you caught or what you wanna talk about, but
Well, I have on the topic of anything outside of kind of the molecular and biochemistry end, I don't know very much at all, and I want to be here just also for moral support for the crew. So if anything does pop up that someone wants to talk about, I'm here, but I think I'll probably be silent mostly for tonight. Oh, great to
well,
see
it's,
you, Jerry. May I thank Dr. Bergman? You wrote something that was really helpful on one of my radio shows about Ernst Chain. Without you,
Oh,
I
yeah.
wouldn't have found that. So, very sincere thanks. I was trying to point out that they're Nobel Prize winners in science. Ernst Chain was the co-developer of penicillin with Alexander Fleming, and he had very creationist-leaning ideas. And then Richard Smalley. There are probably a few quiet that are in the closet, but I really wanted to thank you for the reference to Ernst Chain. So thank you.
He was pretty open about his anti-evolution ideas, at least comparatively. And people don't realize, as you know, without Ernst Chain, he wouldn't have had a penicillin. He had to have a way of isolating it, and Fleming couldn't do that. So Ernst Chain was the one who made it practical, who isolated. Had a very effective way of isolating it. Probably others would have later on come up with that, but he came up with that first.
Well, it was important for me to share that because they keep saying evolution's the basis of biology. And I said, why are there so many people that don't believe in evolution and they're quite successful biologists? I said, it's useless.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
name calling. That's name like this thing about me. It's name calling. I mean, what he didn't really say anything at all. He just name called, and I kind of knew where he was coming from because he didn't want me to apply the idea of eugenics to Darwinism. Of course, but he certainly excellent does an excellent job talking about the harm that eugenics has done, but he doesn't want that tied to Charles Darwin. So that's the difference between him and me. I'm not sure how he. I guess it was just a bad idea that somebody came up with. That's his conclusion. Doesn't I can't believe he must be aware that indeed we're talking about Darwin to Galton to eugenics. I mean, it's a very straightforward progression from Darwin's ideas to, made it very clear. Galton made it very clear where he got his ideas from.
yeah, I took a college level anthropology class, and I did pass it. So apparently I do understand evolution. But one thing I found very interesting was when it came to insects, the professor was just like, "Oh, they're totally different. We don't even know." I'm like, "Okay, so why can't you explain insect evolution, but it's okay with mammals? Well, why? Probably the fossil record, it's less likely there's less fossils of insects, I believe. We do have some.
Well, we have enormous
Probably
in
harder
amber,
to tell.
huge number in amber. And invariably you look at it and entomologists today can look at it and say that's a certain kind of a bee, this certain kind of a wasp. They can identify so many specifics because indeed insects, according to evolutionists that are 2 million years old, are identical to those today.
Maybe a little bigger, but there was more oxygen. But
Bigger, yeah, bigger back then. That's true.
and I really find the spiders, right? So they say that things like tarantulas and funnel web spiders, they call them megalomorphs, and they are old like old spiders, less evolved spiders, whereas I forgot the name for them, but there's the more modern spiders like jumping spiders and wolf spiders and the spiders who have webs, because those spiders have things like this, and the old spiders things like that. But here's if those are evolution from the old world spiders, why are there still old world spiders? Why do we still have megalomorphs?
Now, you shouldn't ask those kinds of questions. You're an idiot. That's why.
Oh, yeah, that ad hominem. Yep. Even spider webs don't make much sense, right? If you have a primitive web, and then somehow, how did the spider know how to build a web? Why would it start doing something different that was already causing it to survive, especially if we still have spiders that build those kind of primitive webs? Obviously, that web was effective enough to make them survive. So what would even trigger the evolution, quote unquote, to begin with?
Well, see, we don't have much evidence in the fossil record for webs because they don't preserve very well. So we know that they were very primitive. We know the original web was one string, and we know they evolved, but we don't have evidence. But of course, it's happened, but we don't have evidence because it just didn't preserve very well in the fossil record.
And we don't have too many fossilized birds, which personally I think is evidence for a flood, because obviously probably the majority of the fossil record is sea creatures, which would make sense because they're closer to the sea floor to get buried in the sediment. Something like a bird would probably be the last thing to drown in the flood when it had to land, so it would not get buried. I know the process of fossilization requires water, pressure, and sediment. So something basically has to be buried in a lot of sediment with water, and then the minerals from the sediment seeps into the bone, and it actually can happen quite quickly. It's actually a myth that fossilization takes deep time to happen. Are we
What's
getting
GNSTV? GNSTV, what's that?
What'd you say?
GNSTV, it's on an icon on the screen here.
Oh, I think that's one of the hosts.
Yeah, that's one of the hosts. Is the Good News Station in Lansing, Michigan. GNS TV.
Let's see, what was I meant with radiometric dating. So I know it has some flaws. Now apparently the counter theory to Mount St. Helens, and that we knew the age of the rocks, they performed potassium argon dating on them, found it was somewhere between like 300,000 to 3 million years old, I believe the testing samples did. Well, now the counter argument to that is argon leaking, and that potassium argon dating is not very good for dating young rocks. I don't know how you would know whether or not a rock was young or not, unless it was something like Mount St. Helens. But have you heard anything on that, Dr. Bergman?
You need to read my article I just published in the Creation and Research Society Quarterly, where I look at that whole question in a different way. And I analyzed Adam when he was just created. He brought a doctor into the garden, said, evaluate this man. He'd do 30 tests, bone density, maturity, 30 different tests, find out they all prove that Adam was early 20s. We know it wasn't early 20s, he was just created. So you cannot create something that's functional. It has to look as old. It has to look some people don't like the word old, but when you create anything, it has to be functional. So Adam had to be functional to survive. You couldn't create a heart here and some cells there and some hair there. You had to create an entire functional body with blood coursing in the veins. Blood stops coursing in the veins for 2 or 3 minutes, he's dead. And so therefore, you have functionality, which is part of creation. And I think the same thing is true of the solar system. The same thing is true of the earth. You have function in creation because you have to. The earth cannot exist as just a planet floating around going nowhere. To exist as a uniform solar system, you have to have functionality, And that means the appearance of age. Some people don't like that term, but on the other hand, basically that's what it is. Things look like it's old and it's not. So that's how I think that's a better explanation because it answers the science. It also answers the scriptures. So, but that's my creation theory, and that's already controversial. So if you get on the website, Creation Research Society Quarterly, I think you can, I should get a copy and send it around to people, but I have the copy of the whole journal, but I don't have a copy of the article. But
Is it
I think
what's the website?
Wes has a copy of my article. Maybe he could send it out.
And what is the website?
It's Creation Research Society Quarterly. They have their own website. The Creation Research Society has their own website. And it's in the current issue that just came out. I probably have a copy around here somewhere, but
Says it's sort of more of a comment than a question, but so Dr. Bergman answered a question about Christian students attending a secular university, but the same question could be asked for Christian colleges. Most of them do not teach a literal creation.
very true, very true. Most colleges don't. In fact, when I was at Cedarville last year, one of the professors there did a survey of what most Christian colleges taught. And he found there was only, I think, 12 colleges that offered bachelor's degrees in an area like business, science, and so on. Only 12 colleges that accepted the creation worldview. All the other colleges accepted the evolutionary worldview. And so we're concerned about converting the evolutionists. Let's convert the Christians. That should be our main focus, is convert the Christians. And it's tragic. Too often we've ignored our own people in this area.
Well, got another question here. So, how does this from Glenn McGargy? How does evolution, epigenetics, and orphan genes? How does evolution predict epigenetics and orphan genes? It's not predicted by evolution.
It's a good question. Epigenetics is one way that we can adapt to a wide variety of environments and situations. It's a built-in system which facilitates adaptation, and it's really an ingenious system. It's almost like having a book with 35 chapters, but it depends upon where your level is at. If you want to go into depth, you read certain chapters. If you want a basic outline, you read other chapters. So we have a lot of information in our genome, which is there, which can be used basically if epigenetics choose for some reason, and we're not sure exactly how this works, but if for some reason we want to use certain genes, they can be turned on by the epigenetics system, or they can be turned off. And so epigenetics is an incredibly good example of built-in mechanism that produces variety. And evolution cannot explain epigenetics. They've tried and they cannot explain it. And they use epigenetics to demonstrate evolution, but on the other hand, wait a minute. You've got to have the system first. It has to work first before it can produce changes. And of course, it doesn't evolve. It produces an ability to adapt to different environments. And so more work we do with genetics, we realize that the body has incredibly complex ways of adapting to a wide variety of environmental situations. It's genius. It's genius. It allows us to do that.
I can take the one on orphan genes.
Good. Okay, please do.
And this is actually a good chance to test my slide, because this is one that I don't have time to show it tomorrow. But I want you to hear, this is an interesting clip. It is by an evolutionary biologist talking to me. We're talking about the protein orchard. So let me try to share this and let's see if it works. So this is a good test for tomorrow. If I do have time, maybe I'll play it tomorrow, but let's give it a roll. This is about orphan genes. Just he doesn't use the word, but it is about orphan genes.
On that, we agree. As you said, like we agree that proteins, unlike cellular life, do not share universal common ancestry, right? We disagree about cellular life, but we agree that proteins don't share universal common ancestry.
Proteins don't share universal common ancestry.
So these orphans just like pop out of nowhere. And he knows that I'm going to challenge him on this. And he finally kind of said, I think you're right, Sal. All proteins just sort of, the major families just sort of popped into existence. Now, he doesn't think it's a problem for evolution. A lot of them just will admit it, that, they don't have a common ancestor for all the major families. I could see it in the bioinformatic databases. It's so blatantly obvious. And I just it's like trying to evolve in gradual steps. You can evolve a car battery to another car battery, changing the dimensions. You're not going to be able to evolve a car battery into a piston or vice versa. It's kind of the same way with the parts of biology. And so how do they explain it? So what Dr. Dan would say, he's a Rutgers evolutionary biologist, professor of biology. He'll say, well, new proteins arise all the time. And I'll say, look, I'll even grant you new proteins arise all the time, but not the level of complexity of certain the ones that I study, because I ask you guys how these things evolved and you don't have any answers except you do some sort of phylogenetic reconstruction and assign a date, but that's not an explanation in terms of physics, chemistry, and probability theory. But you heard it from the horse's mouth right there. He admitted no common ancestry, and just like, well, where did they come from then? And it was like, well, they just arise. They just arise all the time, and just like, yeah, show me experiments.
Let me mention something about Dr. Dan. He is one of the brave souls that's willing to debate us. I have been trying to get someone to debate me for 20 years. I've failed. The atheist group in Indianapolis, by the way, they contacted Richard Dawkins and they said he'd like to debate me. Fine. So Richard Dawkins wanted a copy of my resume before we debated. So I sent a copy not to Richard Dawkins, but to the atheist group in Indianapolis. They sent it to Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins emailed the atheist group in Indianapolis. They emailed me and said the debate's off.
Yeah.
The reason was they didn't want to give creationists credibility. That's why. And to me, that's, of course, an excuse, but so many evolutionists, I would say the majority, are not willing to debate us. And so Dr. Dan is really brave, and I appreciate that. He's a nice guy, too. That's part of it.
Yeah.
And so he is willing to debate us, and that's what we need, and that's good.
And he made a huge concession right there publicly. And I told him, I said, Dr. Dan, I'll honor you as much as I can. I'm going to share this at creationist crowds. You're on the record. And I know that he's not going to, he might only get flack for saying it, but all the evolutionary biologists know it. He's only, I sort of drew it out of him. I mean, if you want me to share my slides, maybe since it was a question and it is something I may not have time to cover tomorrow, would that be all right with you, Kurt? So let me see. So this began when I was doing a paper with Dr. Sanford. We archived this in the Chem Archive. And that's when I really started learning protein chemistry. And there's another one who should be a co-author at this point. That's Joe DeWeese. And God willing, we'll get around to actually publishing this in secular peer review. But there's precision shaping of proteins. On the left is a kid's toy. You can see how the shapes have to fit together. On the right is God's toy, so to speak. And all of these have to be spelled precisely and shaped precisely to work. So you see the variety of different shapes of proteins. And on the left here is the spelling of the collagen amino acids laid out. So you can use English alphabetic characters to represent the amino acid. And you could see, I took the liberty of highlighting the G, the glycine amino acids on the collagen. This is a very distinct pattern. It just screams at you when you see it. That's precise spelling. On the right is a zinc finger 136. And the amino acid C, I highlighted here, and the amino acid H, H for histidine, C for cysteine. And each row has to connect a zinc ion to the C's and the H's. And that's why it's called a zinc finger protein. And I showed this to Dr. Dan. I said, look, this is a collagen, this is a zinc finger. There's no way that they have a common ancestor in terms of shape. You can't gradually evolve this and this from a common ancestor. He said, yeah, I think you're right about that. I'm not he said, I'm not a protein biologist, but I think you're right. That was 4 years ago. Over time, he was like, yeah, that's definitely right. Um, so if you look at parts of a car, they're all shaped differently, have different functional roles. Now, if you have a car battery, it's not too outrageous to think of evolving a car battery to another car battery. You could just change the dimensions, right? A little bit wider here or higher there. You can evolve a piston to another piston, but you can't evolve a piston into a car battery. And likewise, you can't evolve a topoisomerase into a potassium ion channel. And so there's no homology there. And at that point, Dr. Dan caved. So there you have the basis of that argument. I hope that helps you. That didn't answer the epigenetic one, but it's kind of along the similar lines. You need to have so many well-fitting parts. I showed the double-stranded break repair once you get chromatin that makes epigenetics possible in eukaryotic cells. And I said, how do you go from a bacteria that doesn't have chromatin to a eukaryote that does? And the eukaryote has to have a double-stranded break repair. I showed the diagrams of the complexity of double-stranded DNA break repair. That debate was over in 30 seconds.
No, see, I could see them probably saying something like, well, you just don't understand evolution. That's not how it works. Or you can't compare mechanical parts to a biological part, something like that.
Yeah, that doesn't get very far. I mean, they'd rather just not talk rather than just dig holes, unless they're really idiots, which there are a lot on the internet. But the people like Dr. Dan, it's like, no, he's not going to risk saying something stupid. He'll just cave when he knows I got him,
Well, Sally, if you feel willing, if you could share some of the slides, that would complement some of my presentations, and I will give you full credit.
Oh, thank you.
Done a good job. This is the kind of stuff we need to get into churches, because the average sixth grader could easily follow what you're saying.
Well, it took a lot of effort. Let me just say that took days. I said, how can I make this accessible, because it's so hard, and strip out, a lot of the molecular biology and biochemistry, and say, just, that's why I like the kids' toys. I had to search for about an hour to find these kids' toys. I said, the kids can understand this.
Yeah. And that's good.
By the way, the gentleman who asked that question, thank you. That was Glenn. This is why random mutation is usually bad. When you change the shape of functioning parts randomly, that's usually not good. You're going to have a very hard time evolving something that is shaped one way, like, say, a potassium ion channel. You're probably going to break it first, because it has precision down to the angstrom, or actually subatomic level, not subatomic. It has to be less than the radius of a potassium ion. That's how precise this is. We can't mill anything to that degree of precision. And so that's why random mutation is just, people were like, we have all these studies. And I said, there's a better way to say why it's bad. Just look at car parts. Just randomly change the shape of car parts. If you might be able to randomly change seats, rip them apart, okay? And that's usually what the evolutionists will say. They'll cite examples where you could damage something. But damage something that's really critical, like an ATP synthase, potassium ion channel, anything that needs very precise connections, it's gone.
And an engine is like a mechanical engine or mechanical engineered parts. The protein synthesis and things that you're starting, that is much more complicated even than something like an engine, which does require a lot of precision. You misshape a piston, what happens to the engine? Like, it starts misfiring, it doesn't right. So every part on an engine needs to be specific to that vehicle. You couldn't put a Honda valve in a, 8-cylinder truck, that wouldn't work either, right? So, and we're talking something much more complicated and precise when it comes to
Right.
these molecular structures.
What has changed in the argument in creationism and also intelligent design in the last 40 years is we have so much more data. We can actually visualize these things with electron microscopes or other, X-ray crystallography. Genome sequencing is 1 million times cheaper. Just think about that instead of, you know, um, I can't do the figures in my head off the top, but like, it costs $3 billion to sequence a human genome. It's probably could be done for less than that, $300. I mean, or 3,000. It now that we're able to sequence things, and I'm going to make that point. We're seeing, we're seeing the effect of devolution. It's so blatant. We're seeing the effect of mutations. We're seeing it's so difficult to evolve one major protein family into another. This was actually maybe even, 30, 40 years ago, people actually thought you could just have one functional protein and it's going to diversify. And some of these origin of life researchers with their, it's like we can evolve we got a functional protein. It's going to evolve into all these. I'm just like, no, it's not. I got Dr. Dan I can quote too. So, I mean, this is why the origin of life problem is, this protein orchard also applies to origin of life. It's like, well, big whoop, you found one way to make one protein. It's not going to evolve into all the ones you need.
Hey, could I say something here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm Joe, but hey, Salvador, one thing I'm thinking of is Eugene Koonin. And I think you said he's probably, in your opinion, the top evolutionary biologist in the world.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's interesting. I note that he has proposed an a mech he's proposed a mechanism to try to make abiogenesis more probable. And he seems to admit that in the entire universe, the probability of it happening anywhere, not just on one planet Earth, is so low that he invokes this mechanism, which is an infinite number of parallel universes. Not just another universe, but an infinite number of them to try to increase the odds just to get two mechanisms. I think it was replication and translation. Were those the two mechanisms? So not even to get everything, just two of those little pieces uh, to to get things going. I think that's really amazing. He seems to implicitly admit the extremely low probability of abiogenesis.
Yes. Which is really powerful coming from someone in his position. By the way, I studied under one of his staff members at the NIH. So it's funny. I see Koonin plus the co-author who's my professor in graduate bioinformatics. Koonin is respected see what Koonin did, he's actually very well respected by ID proponents of the ones we respect. We usually disrespect most of them. We actually think well of Koonin because even though he's invoking multiple universes, he's at least being honest about the odds being remote. He's the first one to really come forward of that level of reputation and say, hey guys, quit doing these chemical experiments. It's not going to work. The odds don't favor you. He's essentially saying, it's another way of saying that you need so many universes. There's no way you're going to solve the origin of life problem. He laid that out. Now, granted, that wasn't as much as the creationists may have wanted, but that was still a very big step. And he's not the only one. There was a physicist who basically said the same thing. And I could totally see it. So in my lifetime, I was raised watching Jacob Bronowski in junior high. I'm kind of revealing my age here. That was in 1976 or so. And they're saying, the Uri Miller experiment. And so, I went to secular public school. I said, oh, okay. I still, later on I began to have my doubts, but the attitude then was we're very close to solving the origin of life. And then it didn't take very long before they started saying, well, it's going to be more difficult. I think we need to start to appeal to space aliens or extraterrestrials. And then after that, now we're appealing to multiple universes. And I've seen this trend. It went from being so optimistic to pretty despairing. I mean, it had an effect on me. So I don't think this trend is going to diminish. People are just going to, Steve Benner, who's James Tour has, sparred with, has said, well, maybe we need to invoke new laws of physics. I'm like, yeah.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned space aliens. Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe
Mhm.
co-authored a book. There were several books. Let's see. Life Cloud is one of them. But anyway, yeah, that they developed that idea. By the way, it's interesting that Fred Hoyle, who gave the Big Bang its name, he coined the term as a name of derision because at the time he did not believe in it. But he wrote a book titled The Mathematics of Evolution. So it's interesting that he's known for stating how unlikely it is. And this was, several years ago. So, his comment might be different now, but I think he said 10 to the 40,000 power, one chance in 10 to the 40,000 power. That's a one with 40,000 zeros. To put that in perspective, the entire universe is estimated to have around 10 to the 80 power. I've seen different numbers, 10, 70 something, 10 to 100, but one followed by around 100 zeros. That's the estimated number of atoms or particles in the universe. Now, if you increase that, instead of 100 zeros, you put 40,000 zeros. That's a lot more, a lot bigger number. And Hoyle said that the chance of forming even, as I recall, one single protein, correct me, Dr. Bourbon or Sal, if I get this wrong, but one single protein rather, not a very complicated one, but he said it was one chance in 10 to the 40,000. And is that different due to increased knowledge today? Uh,
Well, we had there was an experiment done, it was falsely advertised, to get the hype by Craig Venter for the minimal cell. The minimal cell has 500,000 letters. And when they were first trying to make this minimal cell, so it's really just the transplant, it's just the DNA. They tried to see what was the minimal DNA and they were transplanting DNA and, they put it on computer, record the sequences and then, create the sequences and shove it inside a cell, see if it lived. 500,000. And the first round, the thing was dead. They said, we don't know what's going on. They tracked it down to a single letter out of 500,000. Out of 500, I mean, it took a year to fish the error out. A year. They had all these scientists trying to figure out what did we misspell. So I think, they could test, each 500,000 nucleotides to see if it's that sensitive, but it wouldn't surprise me. Let's say 10% are absolutely have to be there. That'd be about 50,000. So, Hoyle's calculations seems to be in the ballpark, which is amazing given what little he knew back then.
Just one comment. The problem I think with evolution is it's misleading the scientists. And we have to take our evolution glasses off and look at the world the way it is. And I think what you're bringing out is clearly you need to look at what's there. And they're not doing that. They're distorting the reality to conform to a worldview. And that's causing problems. So when people say, why am I involved in this? Why am I doing this? Part of it is for science. wanting to quote save science, to get science back on the track of trying to understand what's there. And evolution has really put us down the wrong track and caused a lot of harm.
Before you go, Dr. Bergman, I want to publicly thank you before the audience here. I nearly left the Christian faith 25 years ago. It was articles by you and Royal Truman and others that kept me in it. Thank you. I'm here
that's
today
good to hear.
help me.
Okay, that's great
Thank
to
you.
hear.
Yes.
I thought
Thank
that
you,
would mean
Dr.
something
Bergman.
to you.
Well, thank you.
Now, Sal, if I understand, and maybe I'm mistaken, you are knowledgeable of some of the cosmology arguments, or okay.
Mhm.
So one thing I've found that let's say someone like Hugh Ross, and nice gentleman and all that, but of course he's older. The big reason for that is because of the light traveling and the speed of, assuming the speed of light is constant and the nearest stars are billions of light years away, that whole argument, what would be your counter to that?
When I went to graduate school, I was about 25% convinced of old, 75% convinced of young. And exactly to this day, that problem is unresolved, in my opinion, despite what Jason Lyle says and others. I think there's still too many experiments that have to be done. So, but the thing that changed is I was studying the big man cosmology. I think I have a book here, my cosmology book. And we got to the point of resolving problems in the Big Bang model. We got to the point of the inflation model. And in the inflation model, you have galactic amounts of matter being pushed around at faster than the speed of light. 1,000 times faster, 1,000,000 times faster, no one knows. And I'm like, how is that any more outrageous than young Earth creationism? I mean, I almost fell out of my chair. I said, you just invoked it because you have these problems. You have not one shred of evidence that this ever happened, except the Big Bang. That's kind of circular reasoning. And I was thinking, gee, I thought the Eck models were outrageous until I saw that. So that started it. And other people, physicists, secular physicists, have also seen that too. And they started proposing variable speed of light. And I'm just like, okay, so it's crank science if young Earth creationists say, well, the speed of light could have been variable, but it's accepted science if you have variable speed of light to defend the Big Bang model. And I'm like, okay, so you guys pretend you figured it all out, but you're having to use the same mechanisms we would to solve our models. I mean, kind of the same order of like outrageousness. And I said, now it's a level playing field. And I have done some interferometry experiments. We're looking at variable speed of light. Reginald Cahill's work, I've been very impressed with that. He built experiments. He's published in the American Physical Society 7 times, which you don't get unless you're really a good physicist. He's a tenured retired professor. One of his students is also just brilliant, who did an experiment that I was trying to replicate. And so he showed that the Michelson-Morley experiment it's not been accurately characterized. I mean, it's not that it was necessarily nefarious, but it turned out if you have a refractive media that may influence it. So the first Michelson-Morley experiment actually did detect kind of like an ether. And so that was because it wasn't doing light in a vacuum, it had air. The Dayton Miller experiments that were like the Michelson-Morley type were also done in air, and they were detecting relative motion, exactly what you would see for an ether. So I began to say, let's look at this, and we just need to do more experiments, and this would be of interest to the Department of Defense, anyone dealing with that area. So I was like, okay, look, we're all making a lot of speculations in the absence of data. I think a lot of experiments will surprise us. I continue to be, hearing just little things of like this anomaly here or this anomaly there. But so how do I handle the distant starlight problem? I say, look, if you look at modern cosmology, they're invoking stuff that's just as outrageous as anything the young Earth creationists are. You're just not aware of it because they don't want to look like, silly. Um, but they had variable speed of light on the table. That's because they're trying to solve Big Bang problems. So, they don't want to talk about it very much. But now inflation's going into disfavor because it is so outrageous. I mean, moving stuff at galactics, at faster than the speed of light, amounts of matter that are galaxies, clusters of galaxies.
I'm thinking of a book by, I think, Aguayo. Title of the book is Faster Than Light. Are you
Maguejo,
Aguayo?
Chao
Yes.
Maguejo.
Yes. So yeah, and he's a PhD in theoretical physics, I believe. But yeah, so he's entertaining the possibility of faster light in the past. So,
Mhm.
but one thing that strikes me, you mentioned, Sal, a double standard, like variable speed of light is okay for some group of scientists, but it's not okay for creationists. You know, it reminds me of something in science, and you could relate this to what Dr. Bergman said just before he left to save science, that there's the double standards, the bias, and I think the quote of Max Planck, the father of quantum mechanics, which says that we don't get new science because of the evidence. We get it because eventually the scientists with the old theories eventually die. And then new people come along. It doesn't have to be that way, though. Yeah.
Well, I think as we get more evidence, but I like that quote, science moves forward one funeral at a time. But I think as we have, as technology moves forward, it's been favorable to us. We're getting all sorts of surprises.
Well,
I just mentioned, like, for example, Jerry Bergman, he helped restore me to the faith. That was before Mary Schweitzer found these soft dinosaur tissues. I mean, they're just, who knows what else we're going to find.
hmm and it's interesting because I bet you were not hearing what Dr. Bergman was saying from a lot of voices all over the place, right?
Hmm.
It was a minority. There is a minority variable. There is a minority theory that not many have heard of. I never heard of it until I accidentally stumbled onto it looking for something else. It's really interesting. So I looked into it. The variable speed of light, there is data going back 300 years. Stanford Research Institute years ago, maybe around 1990, but years ago, they commissioned a white paper by two scientists about constants like the speed of light. Stanford Research Institute International. And that document gives data showing that, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, the speed of light was quite different from what it is today. And the measurements seem to be trending so that the speed of light has been slowing down. And not only that, but the report mentioned other constants like Planck's constant.
Well, I'm aware of
But
that. I had worked briefly, volunteer work on Barry Setterfield's ideas. I don't accept most of them at this point. I still regard him as someone I appreciate who came into my life. I think the mechanism. I mean, we need to have we need more experiments. I really want to see more interferometry experiments done with refractive media, and so
Well,
we might be able to actually affect the speed of light in vacuums. We'll see. I've seen some papers to that effect. If you could change the 0 point energy, and who knows? I mean, Barry Satterfield was probably onto something, that there could have been changes in the 0 point energy in vacuum space. But all of this is why I say, I really do think Providence we have to rely on Providence to give us some answers. I never thought the James Webb Telescope would give us so much of this stuff. I started debating the Big Bang, and I could see it. The physics community is like, well, they're starting to say, well, maybe it's wrong, and just like, yeah, now that you have more data, it looks worse. I'm not not underestimating what God might do for us, because creationism stands today not because of our abilities, but because the Lord had provided.
Well, I'd say that the secularists believe that nothing exploded and created everything, and they believe that all life came from rocks and rain. If they want to call our views ridiculous or absurd, kind of back at you.
I mean, you know, I'm confident that life was created. You know, trying to actually solve the distant starlight problem, I think, is going to be the last frontier. Some of the stuff with radiometric dating, I'm working on. I have a very unorthodox view of it. I'm the only one that's promoting this, but I'm just like, well, there are actually experiments now that are changing nuclear structure at low energies. Tens of millions of dollars just flowing into this quietly. Your taxpayer dollars are paying for some of this research. So
We've got a few questions here in the live stream chat. Belinda says, Dr. Berman made a great point. Adam was created to be 20 years old because his body had to be functional. Couldn't stars have been created at 1 million years old to be functional, produce our light?
sure, yes. Short answer, yes. Short answer, yes. But it would look maybe like it's 1 million years old, but that's, you know, arbitrary and based on the tons of assumptions. And there's good evidence it's better to create a star than try to evolve it. There are problems in being able, you know, they think all you need is gravity. It's like, well, it could be a little bit more complicated than that. We'll see. But a short answer, yes. The problem is how that light from that star that was created could reach us. God could create it in transit, but then it'll raise a lot of philosophical problems about false histories. Are we seeing things that really never happened? And that's why a lot of creationists, I wouldn't say all of them, there are a lot of creationists that don't believe in, you know, that God created light in transit because they would consider it kind of deceptive. And I'm not going to argue theology. It just kind of has, it's unsettling from an aesthetic point of view. We'll find out. I'm trusting the Lord that he's going to provide a way that we could resolve this. We just have to be patient. Because I've seen the creation evolution controversy unfold over 40 years, and it's been exciting to see just how far we've come along. So I'm excited to see how this might be resolved. You know, I'm sorry I can't give you a more definitive answer, but short answer, yes, about stars being created instantly.
There's only one more I see here. Why do evolutionists ignore sea fossils mixed with land and large fossil beds?
It's evidence against their worldview.
Sounds like a psychological answer, like cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias.
That's out of my field.
Well, they did find, yeah, they found what fossilized seashells on, was it Mount Everest, I believe? So how did a fossilized seashells get up there?
I think that's it for the questions, but Sharon made a nice comment here. She said, Russ Humphrey's idea that God may have stretched out time along with space and stars. The Bible repeatedly says he stretched out the heavens. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, he said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Certainly possible, but then you're getting more into the, like, we can't really scientifically test miracles because miracles are supernatural. Science only measures and tests material, natural things. So even something like someone being miraculously healed, which happens, there's no scientific explanation for it, or at least they haven't been able to do that. So when it comes to miracles, it's the resurrection, walking on water, controlling the storms, all that. That does get more into a theological argument. However, there is a secular presupposition that miracles are impossible. And to me, if Genesis 1:1 is true, then everything else that follows in the Bible is at least possible. I mean, I
And
guess
which
with that we can wrap everything up, but I'll just announce, so anybody who is watching, tomorrow we are going to be having Doug Sharp, Dr. Rob Stadler, Fred Williams, Sal Cordova, who you've got to hear a bit from tonight. You have Dr. Joel Brown, Dr. Aaron Shoulders, and then Dr. James Tour. is finishing up, and then we will be, just like we did tonight, kind of having this both Q&A and discussion panel. That's how we'll be finishing up tomorrow night. So please join us, like and subscribe, put it on your calendar. We'd love to see you tomorrow, and I hope this was a blessing to you all. Again, this is the Creation Summit 2025, and we'll be doing more in the future.